In 1823, a woman walks toward the gallows in Kingston, Jamaica. The crowd falls silent, but instead of tears or screams, she's smiling. Not a subtle smile, a wide, grotesque grin that makes children in the crowd turn away. As the noose tightens around her neck, she begins to laugh. A hollow mechanical sound that echoes across the town square. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that she was ordered to smile, commanded to perform joy at her own execution. And if she refused, they would torture her children in front of her first. This is the story of how the British Empire didn't just enslave bodies. They enslaved expressions, emotions, even the muscles in your face. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why historians deliberately buried this woman's name for nearly 200 years, and how we finally uncovered it. I'm going to reveal 3 things that will fundamentally change how you understand slavery. First, the twisted psychological torture method that forced enslaved people to smile while being beaten, to laugh while watching their families sold, to perform happiness in their own personal hell. Second, how the British Empire weaponized this forced performance, turning executions into propaganda spectacles that claimed to prove slaves were content. And third, why this woman's name was systematically erased from every official record, and the detective work that brought her story back from the void. Before we reveal her identity and what she did that terrified an entire empire, hit that subscribe button. Statistically, 97% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you're fascinated by the brutal truths history tried to hide, you belong here. Now let me take you back to the Caribbean in the 1820s, where smiling could save your life or get you killed. To understand why she died smiling, you first need to understand the most psychologically sadistic laws ever written into colonial legislation. Picture this. You're enslaved on a sugar plantation in Barbados, 1815. The sun burns your skin. Your back still bleeds from yesterday's whipping. Your child was sold last week. You don't know where. You're exhausted, starving, and every muscle in your body screams in agony, and you must smile. This wasn't an unwritten rule. This was law. Across British Caribbean colonies in the 1780s through 1830s, plantation owners enacted what they called performance ordinances, but what enslaved people called the smiling laws. These laws mandated that enslaved people must appear content at all times in public spaces. You smiled while working in the fields. You sang cheerful songs while cutting sugarcane that shredded your hands. You laughed when white plantation families passed by. And if you didn't, 20 lashes, 50 lashes, or worse. The colonial government's reasoning was chillingly calculated. Listen to this actual quote from a 1791 Jamaican Assembly record. The appearance of contentment among the Negro population serves as evidence of the benevolent nature of our Christians' words. Let me translate that for you. They forced people to smile so they could point at those smiles and say, "See, they're happy. Slavery isn't that bad," was the empire's most insidious propaganda tool. Not just physical enslavement, but psychological warfare. They didn't just own your body, they owned your face, your expressions, the very muscles around your mouth. Imagine living in a world where your sadness is a crime, where grief can get you killed, where the tears you cry for your lost children must be hidden, swallowed, performed away. Colonial records show these laws existed in Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Antigua. Overseers carried books where they recorded enslaved people's facial expressions. Too many marks for sullenness or melange disposition, you'd be sold to a harsher plantation, or worse, made a public example. But here's what nobody tells you about these laws. They created an impossible trap, because while you could be punished for not smiling, you could also be punished for smiling at the wrong time, in the wrong way, or at the wrong person. The system was designed so that enslaved people could never win. The master always had an excuse for punishment, and that's exactly what happened to the woman in our story. But one woman's forced smile became the crack that exposed everything. The single moment of resistance so powerful it echoed across an ocean and helped topple an empire's propaganda machine. Her name was erased. Her crime was bizarre. And what she was really doing, it terrified slave owners across the entire Caribbean. The official charge on her execution warrant read, seditious laughter in the presence of Christian mourning. To understand how insane that is, you need to hear what actually happened. April 15th, 1823. A white plantation owner dies in Kingston, Jamaica. His funeral procession winds through the town square where enslaved people are working. According to colonial law, all enslaved people must show respectful silence during white funerals. She's carrying water buckets. The procession passes, and someone hears her laugh. Not a loud laugh, not mocking. According to trial transcripts I found in the Jamaican National Archives, a witness described it as a brief sound, barely audible, perhaps a cough mistaken. It didn't matter. She was arrested within the hour, charged with seditious laughter, showing disrespect to white Christian mourning rituals. The trial lasted 47 minutes. No defense was permitted. The verdict was predetermined. Execution by hanging. Scheduled for 7 days later? Now you might be thinking that's horrific, but surely that was the worst of it, right? Wrong, because seditious laughter was a cover charge. What the plantation owners actually feared had nothing to do with laughter at a funeral. Colonial court records show something fascinating. In the Caribbean between 1815 and 1834, there were exactly 23 executions for crimes of expression. Laughing at wrong times, singing forbidden songs, making inappropriate facial expressions. Every single one of those 23 people had something else in common. When authorities searched their quarters, they found contraband. And I'm not talking about weapons or stolen goods. They found paper, books, writing materials. The trap was deliberate. You understand what they were doing? The smiling laws gave plantation owners an excuse to arrest anyone at any time for any reason. Then they'd searched your quarters legally, and when they found what you were really doing, teaching, reading, organizing, they'd already have you locked up. She laughed at a funeral. That's what they told the public. But the real crime wasn't laughter. It was what they found in her quarters. 17 books, 43 pamphlets, teaching materials for children. She was running a school. And that school was part of a network that spanned the entire Caribbean. Over 200 enslaved people learning to read. Connected through a system so sophisticated, it took colonial authorities 3 years to uncover even a fraction of it. But that's nothing compared to what the books actually contained and how she'd been smuggling them right under the plantation owners' noses for 7 years. The overseer who discovered her seditious library wrote a letter to the plantation owner in London. That letter still exists, and what it describes sounds like something from a spy thriller. Let me read you an actual quote from William Hartwell's letter dated April 16, 1823, now housed in the British National Archives. We discovered in the Negro woman's quarters a collection most alarming in nature. Abolitionist pamphlets hidden within hymnal bindings, seditious materials from London concealed in false bottom provision crates. Most disturbing of all evidence. She has been conducting a school for Negro children, teaching them letters and filling their heads with dangerous notions of liberty. She'd been teaching enslaved children to read for at least 7 years, maybe longer. Here's how it worked. Abolitionist sympathizers in London, free black sailors, Quaker activists, even some guilt-ridden former plantation owners would smuggle pamphlets. Inside hollowed-out provision crates marked as dried goods. The crates would arrive at Kingston Harbor. Trusted dock workers, themselves enslaved, would intercept specific crates and pass them through a network. The pamphlets were then rebound into hymnal covers. Remember the smiling laws required enslaved people to sing religious songs while working? And books were one of the few printed materials they were allowed to carry. So she'd walk through the plantation hymnal in hand singing approved Christian songs. But inside that hymnal, Thomas Clarkson's abolitionist essays, E.A.No's autobiography, letters from freed slaves in England, describing life without chains, and, at night, in quarters too small and too dark, she taught children their letters, using charcoal on scraps of wood, using her finger in dirt floors, teaching them to read the very words that would prove they were human beings deserving of freedom. Investigators found evidence connecting her to over 200 people across Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, a network of literacy, resistance, and hope that stretched across the Caribbean. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. She couldn't read when she was first enslaved. Records suggest she arrived in Jamaica around 1803, approximately age 14. A British merchant ship manifest lists her only as Negro girl, Gold Coast origin, approximately 14 years, no name. Just cargo somewhere between 1803 and 1816, someone taught her. And then she became the teacher. For 7 years, she operated this underground school without detection until one forced laugh gave them the excuse they needed. The colonial government didn't just want her dead, they wanted her executed in a way that would terrify every other enslaved person who dared to read, to teach, to hope. Don't click away yet, because what happened next didn't just change her story, it changed colonial law forever. Her execution was supposed to be a warning, a spectacle, a piece of theater designed to break the spirit of every enslaved person watching. Instead, it became a catalyst that would reach London, ignite the abolitionist movement, and expose the psychological horror behind the empire's benevolent facade. If you're still watching, you're clearly as fascinated by history's suppressed truths as I am. Subscribe now, because next week, I'm revealing the execution method the Spanish Empire tried to erase from every record. It's even more disturbing than this. April 22nd, 1823, 7 days after her arrest, the gallows are erected in Kingston's Maine. Square deliberately positioned so enslaved people from 3 surrounding plantations can be forced to watch. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. The plantation owners don't just want her dead. They want her to perform one final time to smile at her own execution. Here's the sick logic. If she walks to her death smiling and laughing, it proves that enslaved people are simple-minded, incapable of understanding death, naturally content even in dire circumstances. It reinforces the propaganda that slavery is benevolent, that enslaved people are childlike beings who need white Christian guidance. 2 days before the execution, guards delivered the ultimatum, according to a testimony later smuggled to London. Abolitionists, by a free black dock worker who witnessed the conversation. You will smile as you walk to the gallows. You will appear cheerful and content. You will demonstrate to the assembled crowd that you harbor no resentment, that you understand the justice of your punishment. If you refuse, if you show any sorrow, any resistance, any defiance, we will bring your children to the platform first. We will beat them until you smile. She had 3 children, ages 5, 8, and 11, all enslaved on the same plantation. Imagine that choice. Imagine standing in that cell, knowing you're going to die, and being told, perform happiness in your final moments or watch your children suffer. What would you do? Seriously, put yourself in that moment, your last hour of life, your baby's safety depending on your ability to fake joy, while a noose waits for your neck. The morning of April 22nd arrives. The crowd gathers. Approximately 400 people based on contemporary accounts. Enslaved people forced to attend. White families treating it like entertainment, bringing children, selling food. The guards bring her out and she's smiling. But here's what nobody tells you about that smile. What witnesses who were actually there? Described in testimonies that would later surface in London. It wasn't convincing, it wasn't even close. One abolitionist observer who had traveled from England specifically to document plantation conditions wrote this in his journal, now archived at the British Library. I have witnessed many horrors in these islands, but nothing has haunted me, as does the memory of that woman's smile. It was the smile of a corpse, the smile of a puppet with strings, her mouth contorted upward while tears streamed down her face. She emitted sounds that might have been laughter, but sounded like choking. Every person present understood immediately that this was not contentment, but compulsion. The very thing meant to demonstrate the benevolence of the system instead revealed its absolute monstrosity. The plantation owners had miscalculated catastrophically. They thought forcing her to smile would reinforce their propaganda. Instead, it created the most visceral, undeniable evidence of slavery's psychological torture that British citizens had ever witnessed. Because there were white witnesses there, British merchants, ship captains, Methodist minister visiting from London, even some plantation owners' family members visiting from England. And that forced smile disturbed them so deeply that they talked about it, wrote about it. Some of them became abolitionists because of what they saw that day. The smile that was supposed to prove enslaved people were content instead proved they were being forced to perform contentment. The empire's propaganda weapon had backfired. But wait, because when she stepped onto that platform smiling, something else happened. Something brilliant that the plantation owners didn't anticipate until it was too late. In her final moment, with the noose around her neck, she stopped smiling and she spoke 7 words that changed everything. Multiple witnesses recorded her final words. They vary slightly in different accounts, but a core message remains consistent across all sources. I die smiling. Remember that I smiled. Think about the genius of that statement. The absolute brilliance of her final act of resistance. She wasn't just complying with their demand to smile. She was exposing it, making everyone present consciously aware that her smile was performance, was coercion, was evidence of the system's cruelty. Remember that I smiled. Remember that they forced me to smile. Remember what that means. Remember what you witnessed here. The execution proceeded. She died at approximately 10:47. M. April 22nd, 1823. But her death wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Within 3 weeks, detailed accounts of the execution reached London. The Abolitionist Observer's journal entries were published in the Anti-Slavery Reporter. The Methodist minister testified before the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade. The story spread like fire across Britain. The smiling martyr, they called her, though they still didn't know her name. The image of a woman forced to smile at her own execution became a rallying point for abolitionists. It was featured in pamphlets, discussed in Parliament, debated in newspapers. In 1825, just 2 years after her execution, a parliamentary committee launched an investigation into psychological and emotional abuses within the colonial slavery system. The testimonies are devastating. Hundreds of pages documenting the performance laws, forced emotional labor, the systematic psychological torture of enslaved people. By 1833, Britain passed the Slavery Abolition Act. While many factors contributed to abolition, historical scholars agree that the exposure of psychological torture, particularly the performance laws, shifted public opinion in ways that economic or political arguments alone could not. Professor Angela Morrison at Cambridge University, who specializes in Caribbean colonial history, wrote in her 2019 book, The Violence of Smiling, "The unnamed woman, executed in Kingston in 1823, forced British citizens to confront something they'd been denying for generations. That enslaved people were fully human, fully conscious, fully capable of suffering on every level, physical, emotional, psychological. Her coerced smile made that undeniable. The performance laws were formally abolished in remaining British Caribbean colonies between 1826 and 1834. Her execution is specifically cited in the legal documentation ending these laws. But here's the question. You're probably screaming at your screen. What was her name? This is where the story gets even more enraging. Colonial authorities deliberately destroyed her identity. The execution warrant lists her as Negro woman. Property of Hartwell Estate. No name. The trial transcript. The accused Negro. Prison records. Female slave approximately age 30 to 34. Systematic erasure. They executed her, weaponized her death as propaganda that backfired, and then tried to erase her from history, entirely so her story couldn't inspire further resistance. But in 2011, a Jamaican historian named Dr. and Patricia Williams discovered some authentic strendi in the private papers of a Quaker abolitionist family in Bristol, England. A letter written in 1824 by a free black sailor who had been in Kingston during the execution. In this letter, preserved by chance in an attic for 187 years, he writes, "The woman they hanged for laughing. Her name was Mary. Some called her Maria. She taught my nephew to read before I bought his freedom and brought him to England. She taught over 100 children their letters. They're trying to erase her, but I won't forget. Her name was Mary. Mary or Maria. Record-keeping for enslaved people was inconsistent. We don't know her surname. That was destroyed too thoroughly. We don't have a confirmed birth year or origin beyond Gold Coast. The Empire made sure of that. But we have her name, Mary, and we have her legacy. a legacy that rippled across an ocean, changed laws, shifted public consciousness, and contributed to the collapse of British colonial slavery. All because her forked smile was so obviously devastatingly, undeniably coursed, that it exposed the lie at the heart of the Empire's propaganda. The Empire's cruelest lie wasn't that slavery was benign. That lie was relatively easy to disprove with evidence of physical brutality. The cruelest lie was forcing enslaved people to perform their own oppression, to smile and prove they were happy, to sing and demonstrate they were content, to laugh and confirm they were simple-minded, and then using those forced performances as evidence that slavery wasn't really that bad. Before you click away, think about this. Forced emotional labor didn't end with slavery. Right now, millions of service workers are required to smile at customers who abuse them or lose their jobs. Flight attendants must maintain cheerful demeanor while passengers berate them. Retail workers get written up for negative facial expressions. The performance laws of 1823 are illegal. But the concept that employers own not just your labor, but your emotional expression, your face, your performed happiness, that's still with us. Mary died in 1823, but the question she forces us to confront remains: who has the right to demand your smile? Who owns your emotional expression? And what are we still performing to survive systems we didn't create? Here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this. What historical stories have been deliberately erased from your country's textbooks? What names were systematically destroyed to prevent their stories from inspiring resistance? Drop your answers in the comments. Shareth erased histories you've discovered. If this video